Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So obviously we just had the big card in Saudi Arabia, headlined by Alexander Usyk versus Tyson Fury 2. And that main event of course has stolen most of the headlines. But when you look at the undercard, I'd say one of the main stories, if not the main story, was the performance of Moses Itauma against Dempsey McKen. Now Moses Itauma is considered one of the best prospects in the heavyweight division, if not the best prospect. I would agree with that right now, to be honest with you. 19 years old, moves to 11-0 with 9 knockouts. And, you know, this past weekend he fought Australian heavyweight Dempsey McKen, who was billed as his biggest step up. Now, I've never rated Dempsey McKen, to tell you the truth. Having said that, fight before he gave Hrgovic a relatively tough outing. He was losing that fight quite clearly, but he was giving Hrgovic some awkward moments out of that southpaw stance. It took Hrgovic 12 rounds to stop Dempsey McKen, whereas it took Moses just 1 round to get rid of McKen. So yeah, I was impressed with how Moses got rid of Dempsey McKen. I thought he would do going into the fight, but I kind of thought it would take him a few rounds, like 5 or 6 rounds kind of thing. But he exceeded my expectations. And we're getting to the stage now where Moses Itauma is starting to make a name. He's starting to build hype. And that's going to be a challenge when it comes to matchmaking, because people now are starting to get expectations over Moses Itauma. I don't think it helped when he turned pro, those around him saying he's going to try and become the youngest heavyweight champion in history, obviously beating Tyson's record, who was 20 years old and I think 4 months. That was kind of put over his head from his pro debut. I don't think that's obviously going to happen now because, you know, I think Itauma turns 20 in December. So yeah, him becoming the youngest heavyweight champion in history is not going to happen now. Unless they try and get Pulev, who is the WBA regular champion, but, you know, that's not really a real world title, is it? Let's be honest. But yeah, it kind of goes to show the levels of pressure that has been put on Moses Itauma, basically from his pro debut, but now the public are starting to catch on. Now the public are starting to become aware of who this guy is. And I think that could be a challenge in regards to matchmaking, because we have to remember he is still so young, and there are potentially some unrealistic expectations now being placed over Moses Itauma. Because of public intrigue, there may be a temptation to rush him or put him in fights that he's not quite ready for, kind of hindering the matchmaking process of a young heavyweight. I would say matchmaking in the heavyweight division, matchmaking for a prospect in the heavyweight division is one of the hardest jobs in boxing, because one misstep can end a career. You know, we saw that with David Price back in the day when he stepped up to fight Tony Thompson. That was actually a bigger step up than people realised at the time. You know, Price had been feasting on washed-up domestic fighters like Audley Harrison and Matt Skelton, and then to jump up against a world-level contender like Tony Thompson, it was a huge step up, and Price never really recovered from those losses to him. So I think with Moses Itauma, there should always be a little bit of caution to this early stage of his career, and as he starts stepping through the levels. Given the hype, you know, he should be stepped up, but it should be done in incremental steps where he's slowly climbing the levels each fight. We haven't seen that traditional build-up with Moses Itauma in the sense of going from, like, you know, domestic level to Commonwealth to European to fringe world level, then world level. You don't have to do it in that way, but, you know, it's a good kind of blueprint on how to build a fighter, how to build a prospect. And I think we should probably expect that from Moses Itauma. Domestically in the UK, I think there are fights for him, fights in which he could learn from, fights in which will give him rounds, but fights in which he should win. I'll give you an example. A Hughie Fury. Hughie Fury's not going to knock out Moses, we know that. But he's experienced enough, he's durable enough to give him rounds and show him different looks, different angles, things like that. You know, Hughie Fury is, dare I say, a negative fighter who's not going to hand over a knockout on a plate. You're going to have to work for it, and it's probably going to take a few rounds. Plus, he's got a good chin. I think somebody like Hughie Fury in the next 6 months would be very beneficial for a guy like Moses Itauma. You know, there are probably a few people out there who would see that as a risk, but I don't. I think long gone are the days of the chances of Hughie Fury becoming a contender. I don't think he's at that level anymore. There was a brief time when he fought Pulev, Povetkin, and Parker when he was like a fringe contender, but I think those days are gone now. I would look at Hughie Fury to be an opponent for Moses in the next 6 months. I think that could be a very good learning fight. You have other guys at domestic level. I think a guy like David Adelaide for Itauma's next fight could be a good shout. You know, Adelaide versus Itauma would probably headline a card, maybe at the Copper Box. That could be a good experience for Moses. You know, headlining a show against a domestic rival. Adelaide's not going to go in there to lay down. He's going to throw leather. He hits hard. So that could show us, again, different sides to Moses. There's a couple of fights domestically that are there for him right now. In fact, I wouldn't mind seeing him fight a guy like Adelaide and then following from that, fight Hughie Fury. But even internationally, there are some fighters out there and fights out there for Moses that make sense. You know, there are lower level American guys like Stephen Shaw, for example, who got outpointed by F.A. Ajagba. I think that'll be a fine fight for Moses Itauma. I think a guy like Guido Vianello in the next couple of fights could be good for Moses Itauma. You know, Guido Vianello coming off a win over Makhmedov, and before that, he gave Ajagba a really good fight. You know, again, comes in with ambition, throws punches, maybe can go a few rounds. There are options out there for Itauma, and there are matchmaking opportunities for Itauma to learn. It's whether the people around him, you know, obviously Frank Warren, his promotional team, etc., it's whether they give him the opportunities to take these sort of fights, or are they going to buy into the hype themselves and try to step this guy up too quick before he's ready? The reason I make this video about Itauma is because I think the talent is there. I really do. I think there's a lot of potential with Itauma. Just to throw it out there, I think Bohdan Myronets is a good opponent for Moses Itauma. Myronets recently beat Nathan Gorman. He beat Cash Ali, and he also beat a Cuban prospect called Jose Lardere. So he's coming off some good form. Never been knocked out, you know, 6'5", big dude, well schooled. Tough outing is Bohdan Myronets, and he's exposed people who are not at a certain level. Guys like Cash Ali, guys like Gorman, and guys like Lardere. So I think there are fights out there for Moses Itauma. It's just managing the public's expectations, essentially, is going to be the challenge here. And that could kind of make a promotional team step a guy up before he's really ready. And I think they need to avoid that with Moses. Because, let's be honest, Queensbury nearly did that with Daniel Dubois. You know, Daniel Dubois, after the Usyk defeat, was at risk of being thrown onto the scrap heap. And at the time, there was a lot of criticism about the levels of matchmaking for Dubois heading into the Joyce and Usyk fights. But, you know, fair play to Dubois, he managed to turn it around and really revitalise his career. He's doing great now. But that's not the norm for a heavyweight prospect that is matched poorly and gets exposed. That is not the norm. We've seen so many heavyweights through the years get exposed at whatever level and never really recover. So yeah, they need to avoid that with Moses. But yeah, I mean, overall, I'm very positive around Moses Itauma. I think he's very talented. But more importantly for me, I listen to the guy in interviews and seems confident, but doesn't seem overly big-headed or overly arrogant. Seems like he's willing to learn, work hard, etc. And that's the main thing. So yeah, I want to see 2025. I want to see an active Moses Itauma, and I want to see incremental step-ups. You know, talking about fighting for a world title in 12 months, for me that's premature. I would want Moses Itauma to have like 20 fights before we talk about that, personally. But who knows, man, maybe he's generational. We'll see. But yeah, he's certainly becoming interesting to follow, I'd say. But anyway, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy. Peace.